As an expert in international relations, Dr. Ben Habib was happy to accept an offer to speak on Australian breakfast TV about developments in North Korea. But come the time of the interview, the academic with La Trobe University in Melbourne found himself having a panic attack live on air and unable to field questions he would normally have answered simply. His nightmare appearance was reported by other media, and for Ben, the experience was mortifying and the feeling afterwards devastating. It was also a turning point in his life. Rather than hide from it, he wrote a blog post in which he publicly confronted issues with anxiety and depression, which he'd not previously acknowledged. What he wrote went viral and led to him getting hundreds of messages of support. I spoke to Ben earlier and I started by asking him to tell me how the panic attack he suffered felt at the moment.
It's a very physical experience, and it also feels like an out-of-body experience at the same time. So let me put it into context for you. What I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling, even though this is a pre-recorded interview, I'm feeling tightness in my chest, in my solar plexus area. I'm feeling my muscles start to get really heavy. And this is now. So back in 2016, when I had this on-air panic attack, my body almost completely shut down. I felt I was being asked the questions by the presenters on air, and I just froze. I couldn't respond to them properly. It's like my brain was operating on one level, but my mouth and the rest of my body just couldn't respond. It felt like I was having an electrical charge pulse through my body. Breathing was really shallow, and when you get put in that situation where you freeze up and you can't respond, it's awful. It feels terrible.
Did you know what was happening?
Yes, at the time. That's the worst panic attack I've had. Since then, I've realised that actually I've had quite a few of them in different situations over time. But that was definitely the worst one. And there was a lot of... It was a perfect storm, if you like, in that environment. So there was, the night before I didn't really sleep at all because I was very anxious about coming to do the interview. I had to commute a long way from where I lived into the central business district of Melbourne to the studio early in the morning. So I was anxious. So by the time I got to the studio, I was really wired. I hadn't slept. And by the time I stepped onto the set, my body was just really seizing up. So I was really defeated before I even began that interview, in hindsight.
Would you say that it's a medical condition?
I don't know if medical's the right way to term it. It's definitely a physical reaction to stressful stimuli. And part of that is, the baggage that I bring into the situation from my history. And part of that is the actual environment and how I'm reacting to that environment. So I found on set was very claustrophobic. It was a really confined space. There's monitors everywhere, lots of lights, the cameras. It's not at all what it appears when you're looking at it on TV. Now, I watch that show every morning, have done for 15 years. But being on the set, it was a completely different experience, and I wasn't ready for that. I do public speaking all the time as part of my job, getting up in front of people. That has its own stresses for me, but the on-set experience, doing a live interview, was something different that really tipped me beyond anything I was prepared for.
I suppose you know how to handle the kind of more regular, potentially stressful situations that you have to go through. You find a way to deal with them, do you?
Yeah, well, I still get anxious before every single presentation I do. Now, I would do about 60 to 70 lectures and presentations a year to various audiences and have done for a long time. And even so, I still get anxious and get that physical reaction beforehand. But when you're doing a 1-hour lecture to a live crowd, it's different. You're able to move around. You've got time, so you can be excused for any pauses or ums and ahs and verbal faux pas that you might make. So you've got time to adjust and react. But in a short interview, you really feel the pressure to deliver eloquently and to deliver a message succinctly. And for me, that kind of format is really difficult. I need time to process what I want to say. The interview format is a harder format for me.
On this television program where you suffered an attack there, you weren't able to speak though, were you?
I was spluttering and I was trying to speak. I was going to say things that I'd said many times before to different audiences, and it just wasn't coming out. And in the end, I had to say, look, I can't do this, and stopped it. And I'm glad I did that, because I don't think we're under any obligation to try and grind through situations like that when we're feeling such discomfort.
I do get, this is why I asked whether it was a medical condition, because on the one hand, you've got the physical symptoms of tightening of the chest and so on that you were explaining. On the one hand, you've got those physical symptoms, but on the other hand, normally, even though we have physical symptoms, we can speak, can't we? We can make ourselves understood. And physical symptoms per se aren't what prevent you from speaking. Is that something different?
Well, I guess, you have to ask a psychologist and other professionals about the precise medical definitions of this. But what I realised, reflecting back on this experience, but it wasn't just about this moment on TV. It wasn't just about the panic attack itself. So I'd realised that I'd been dancing on the edge of panic spirals all the time in my life. I'd had other panic attacks in other situations, but I also realised I'd had counselling and therapy for quite some time prior to the panic attack. So I knew that there was deeper meaning to this moment other than just seizing up because of external stimuli. So this led me through a really long reflective process over the last few years since. Please bear with me. I'd like to flesh this out a bit because I think it's important. So obviously I had these physical reactions in the moment. So that led me to become more body aware and understand that my physical reactions actually told me something about my past experiences and trauma histories and history of family trauma as well. So, I looked back and thought, well, I've got grandparents that had predispositions to anxiety. I had trauma history in my family. So I looked at my maternal grandparents had been taken to Nazi Germany as forced labourers during the war before they immigrated to Australia. And that experience had shaped the family dynamics on that side of my family, and that those patterns had come down to me. And I realised that the way I'd been interacting with people, I really felt like I was trapped in a box, and I didn't understand why until I started investigating some of this deeper stuff. And I had my own history with bullying and abuse at school and in sports teams as well. So all of that came into play, and all of that history I realised was coded into my body and coded how I reacted physically to certain situations, and that was part of my panic attack experience.
Is that your stomach? We can hear gurgling there.
Oh, sorry, that's my dog.
Okay.
All right, mate, you gotta go.
Is that because you'd said earlier that even to conduct this interview that you feel your chest tightening and so on? I was wondering. I genuinely thought, gosh, man, this is incredible. I can hear your stomach gurgling. Well, I'm glad it's not your stomach, and it's okay. Your dog can stay there. It can gurgle as much as it wants.
Global fame for my dog.
Well, yeah. And you started writing your blog after the experience in this television studio. What was the reaction?
Well, I only wrote it just to feel better about myself. I was travelling on the train back to my home from the studio that morning. I was really devastated because it was about the same time as what we're recording now, so early morning. It's peak hour, so there's people everywhere, and I just wanted to crawl into a hole and never be seen again. So I wrote the experience. I wanted to talk about how I was feeling in the moment as this experience was unfolding, and really to save face, because I was quite embarrassed at not being able to perform to the level that I wanted to in the moment. And it just so happened I shared a link to my posting on Twitter, and I tagged in ABC News Breakfast, which is the show. And because I did that, it ended up going viral with the audience there, and the posting was republished by a number of sites in Australia and elsewhere around the world. And I had no idea the kind of reaction that it was going to get. It was very surreal seeing the responses that it got. I ended up receiving hundreds of messages and emails from people around the world, a lot of messages of support from academic colleagues, people that I know, but a lot of people that I didn't know from the profession, expressing support. I got a lot of messages from people who were disclosing their own experiences with anxiety and panic attacks. And some of them for the first time, like they'd never told anyone about their experiences before. So there was quite a burden that came with that for me to really give dignity to the people who had the courage to be vulnerable with me, but also not to try and be a guru and help them beyond my skill set.
Years ago, I had a colleague who suffered a panic attack whilst reading the news on this very radio station. And to sit next to her to witness it was, you can imagine, quite an anxious moment for me as well, because I didn't know what was happening. She seemed to be having difficulty breathing. And this was somebody who had read the news many, many times without showing any discomfort. That's part of the problem, I imagine, for people who have panic attacks. It's one of those hidden traumas that people endure that is not in plain sight, that the public don't know what it is, and we don't know how to respond to it. If there's anything we can say or do that might help, is there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So maybe I'll compare my initial panic attack experience with the interview I did last week with the same presenter, which was a radically different experience. So in the studio, it's live television. There's only so much the presenters could do in the moment, because once it was clear that, my interview wasn't going anywhere, they had to cross and keep working, right? So Virginia Trioli, the presenter who was next to me, was really kind. She grabbed my arm and said, "Don't worry, it'll be all right," and then kept going and doing her job. And then I was ushered out of the studio and kind of left to my own devices, necessarily because people had work to do and jobs to do in the live TV studio. This time around, Virginia and I did a pre-recorded interview on campus at my university. We went to an outdoor space, lots of trees next to a lake. It was really calm. It was a pre-recorded interview. We got a chance to chat beforehand. We'd struck up a relationship beforehand. So it was a much more comfortable setting. And it didn't have the same environmental triggers as being in the studio. So even though I was still quite anxious in the lead up to the interview, it went really well because I wasn't feeling the same stress and claustrophobia in the moment.
And from what you've learned from the people who got in contact after your blog, do you know whether a panic attack is the same for everybody?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if it manifests exactly the same way. A lot of people said that they really resonated with my description of the physical experience. So I think there's a lot in common with that. I think the fact that people have panic attacks and suffer anxiety is a very normal experience, and it's very common. So there was nothing special about what happened to me. It just happened that I have some writing skills and a platform to be able to talk about it. But that's the only thing that was unique. It's something that a lot of people go through.
Is there any one thing that you would give as advice to anybody who suffered a panic attack?
Talk about it. Talk about it with your family and friends and significant others. normalise the experience because it's so common. People will be able to relate to it. This is one thing that I really discovered. And other people find it liberating when people can talk about it, because then it normalises it for them to be able to talk about it and to be able to share the feelings. And it's such a weight off your shoulders when you can just get real about it. But that also requires from other people around someone who's an anxiety sufferer is to be able to listen and be able to hold the space for them to be vulnerable without trying to fix them, without trying to judge them, or without trying to directly intervene their experiences. Learning to hold space is a really valuable skill to help people be vulnerable.
Dr. Ben Habib, what a story, eh? Well, that's it from us. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the squad as ever. We're back with you tomorrow from 1.
News and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.